Jason Statham walks into his own hotel, only to be humiliated by the receptionist who has no idea who he is. What happens next will leave you speechless and might just restore your faith in humanity. Watch this powerful transformation that's inspiring the world. Like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. This is one story you don't want to miss. It all started on a cold Tuesday morning in London. The rain wasn't pouring, just drizzling with that persistent British gloom that made the city seem like it was always caught in a movie scene. Jason Statham sat in the back seat of a black Range Rover, dressed in a charcoal overcoat, plain black tee, and jeans. His style was effortless, rugged yet refined. His face wore the kind of weariness that didn't come from lack of sleep, but for being endlessly recognized, praised, and questioned. Jason had just wrapped a long promotional tour for his latest film, and all he wanted now was quiet. Not red carpets, not interview lights, just peace. No more "what was it like working with" questions. No more flashes. Just silence. Solitude. A moment to breathe. But instead of flying off to some luxury hideaway in Monaco or Los Angeles, he did something no one saw coming. He chose to check in, quietly, anonymously, into a small luxury boutique hotel he secretly owned in London. A place he'd bought years ago under a holding company, not because he needed more investments, but because the property used to be a rundown and he had passed every day as a teenager. He had told himself back then, "One day, if I make it, I'll own that place." And he did. He never bragged about it. Hardly anyone knew. The staff didn't even know their boss was Jason Statham. He let the management team run the place without interference, trusting their reports and only dropping by unannounced once every few years, always through the service entrance. So this time, he decided to enter like a regular guest. No assistant, no entourage, just him and a single duffel bag. It was half out of curiosity, half out of need for a break. He wanted to feel what the guests felt, wanted to see what kind of service his hotel was offering when nobody was watching. Most of all, he wanted to remember what it was like to be treated like an ordinary person. Or so he thought. The lobby was modern, sleek but warm. Marble floors, copper accents, soft amber lighting. A jazz instrumental hummed gently from overhead speakers. Behind the reception desk stood a young woman in her mid-20s. New face, new energy. Her name tag read Sophie. She had just been promoted to front desk manager a month ago and was eager to prove herself. But she was stressed, understaffed, overworked, and on that particular morning, her anxiety had reached a new level after the assistant GM had scolded her for a double booking the night before. So when Jason walked in, soaked slightly from the rain, hood up and beard longer than usual, she barely looked at him. He approached with that signature calm presence. "Hi," he said, placing his ID and credit card on the counter. "I've got a reservation under John Evans." That was his go-to alias. Nothing flashy, just a generic name that flew under the radar. Sophie scanned the screen, typed quickly, clicked through tabs. She frowned. "I don't see a reservation under that name, sir," she said, still not lifting her eyes. Jason leaned in slightly, his voice patient. "I made it online 2 nights ago. John Evans, Junior Suite." She sighed and typed faster. Then she glanced up for the first time and froze. Her eyes widened, but not because she recognized him. No, quite the opposite. She thought she did, mistakenly. "Oh," she said with a sarcastic half-laugh. "Another one of those." Jason tilted his head. "Sorry." Sophie chuckled nervously. "No offense, sir, but we get a lot of people trying to pull the whole I'm Jason Statham's cousin/friend/manager bit to get upgrades or free rooms. And the John Evans trick? That's an old one. Clever, though." Jason blinked slowly, realizing she had not only failed to recognize him. She thought he was a fraud. "Right," he said calmly. "That's not what I'm doing." But Sophie had already made up her mind. Something about his rain-soaked look, the simple bag, the unassuming demeanor. It didn't scream A-list actor to her. It screamed chancer. She straightened her back and gave him the polite but firm tone reserved for guests she was prepared to dismiss. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't find your reservation. And even if you had one, we're fully booked tonight due to the tech conference down the street. Maybe try the Crown Plaza." Jason stared at her. not with anger, but with a look that made her briefly uncomfortable, like he was reading the situation instead of reacting to it. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he asked, still calm. Sophie raised an eyebrow, half defensive. "Should I?" That made him smile, though there was sadness behind it. "Not necessarily," he said, "but I do own this place." She laughed out loud. "That's rich. You own the hotel." She turned slightly to her colleague at the concierge desk, gesturing with her eyes like, "Get a load of this guy." Then she looked back at Jason. "Look, I've had a rough morning. If you're here to play jokes or get viral content, I suggest—" "I'm not," Jason interrupted gently. "But I do own this hotel. Or rather, the company that owns it. I didn't come here to make a scene. Just needed a room." Sophie's patience thinned. She snapped slightly. "Sir, if you don't leave now, I'll have to ask security too." That's when her colleague, an older man named Paul who had worked there for 6 years, looked over. He squinted, took a closer look at Jason. Then his face drained of color. "Sophie," he said, voice barely above a whisper. That's him. That's Jason Statham." Sophie laughed again. "What? No, it's not. Jason Statham wouldn't walk in here like a drowned rat and call himself John Evans." Paul walked quickly over and whispered, "He owns the holding company. I saw the paperwork once when we did renovations. He's come here twice before quietly." "That's him." Sophie slowly turned to Jason, her bravado draining. She looked again. Really looked. The eyes, the jawline, the unmistakable voice. And then she realized, "Oh no. Oh my God," she whispered. I'm so sorry." Jason raised a hand. "It's all right. Really. No, I didn't know. I thought you were—" "A liar?" he asked gently. "Yeah, I figured. Don't worry about it." She stood there, frozen, ashamed, embarrassed, her cheeks burning. But what Jason did next changed everything. And it was just the beginning of the moment that would ripple through her entire life. Because instead of getting angry or pulling rank, Jason looked at her with a kindness she didn't expect. And that one act would unlock a story far greater than anyone in that lobby could have anticipated. Because while Jason Statham had come here for peace, he was about to give someone else something far more powerful: perspective. The moment Jason stepped aside from the counter, Sophie stood frozen behind it, heart racing, mind spiraling into a panic she hadn't felt since her final exams at university. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had turned away Jason Statham. Not just an A-list celebrity, not just a high-profile client, but the actual owner of the hotel. The realization struck her like a hammer. Her hands trembled slightly as she pretended to retype something into the system, hoping to look busy, but all she could think was, "What have I done?" She had judged him, dismissed him, mocked him even, the same man who owned the ground she was standing on. And the worst part? He hadn't even scolded her, hadn't yelled, hadn't called for a manager or stormed out. He had simply observed, and somehow, that stung more than any reprimand could. Jason moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, pulling out his phone and sitting casually in one of the leather lounge chairs. He didn't appear agitated. In fact, he looked more reflective than anything. Still wearing the rain-speckled coat, he just sat there, occasionally glancing around at the lobby, at the lighting fixtures, the art pieces on the wall, the customer service dynamic. It was like watching a silent inspector. He wasn't being arrogant. He was simply absorbing. And from his demeanor, it became crystal clear Jason didn't just own the building. He cared about it. This wasn't just another luxury holding in his portfolio. This was something personal. A legacy, maybe. A mission. Sophie watched him with a growing sense of guilt and disbelief. She leaned toward Paul and whispered, "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Paul gave her a look that balanced sympathy and frustration. "You didn't give me a chance. You were too busy dismissing him." Those words hit hard, but he wasn't wrong. Within moments, the assistant manager, Michael, emerged from the elevator, having been alerted by Paul via text. He was a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 30s with the kind of PR polished charm that could diffuse any situation. As soon as he laid eyes on Jason, his face lit up, then quickly turned serious. He approached swiftly but respectfully. "Mr. Statham, sir, I wasn't aware you were visiting. Had I known..." Jason stood up and shook his hand. "Don't worry about it. I didn't want the red carpet. Just wanted to see how the place ran. Michael nodded, forcing a composed smile. Understood. Please allow me to personally prepare a suite for you. Right away. Jason gestured subtly towards Sophie behind the desk. She doing all right? Seems a bit tense. Michael's neck tightened. She's new, still learning. I'll handle it. Jason put a hand on his shoulder. Don't punish her. Let's see how she handles this. Mistakes are fine. What matters is what people do after. Michael blinked. That simple sentence echoed louder than any executive speech he'd ever heard. Jason walked back toward the desk calmly, placing both hands lightly on the counter. Sophie looked up, cheeks still burning red. I believe there's a room available now, he asked, voice gentle. Sophie gulped, then nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I mean, Mr. Statham. Yes, absolutely. How about the junior suite cleaned and ready? Or, if you prefer the penthouse, I can have it prepped in 30 minutes. Jason smiled. Junior suite is fine. Just one night. She handed him the key card with trembling hands. I'm so sorry for the way I spoke to you. I was stressed, and I shouldn't have assumed anything. You look her in the eye. Assumptions happen. I made a few myself in the past. But you've got two choices now. Let the mistake eat you up, or use it to grow. Sophie nodded, trying to hold back tears. Something in his voice, calm, direct, honest, hit a place inside her she didn't even know existed. Not because he was famous, but because he was human, and because he didn't hold it over her. Jason took the elevator key card and disappeared into the lift. That should have been the end of the encounter. A powerful moment, yes, but one that most would file away and move on from. But that night, something shifted in Sophie. She didn't go home to Netflix and leftovers like usual. She stayed at the front desk hours after her shift ended, reading through training manuals, revisiting policies, making lists of every area she had neglected. She couldn't sleep. She felt like she had been handed a mirror, and what she saw reflected back wasn't about Jason. It was about herself. The way she judged people, the stress she let define her decisions, the way she led from fear, not presence. The next morning, Jason was up early. He dressed in gym gear, cap low over his eyes, and walked down to the small fitness center in the basement. Sophie spotted him through the corner of her eye and, without hesitation, approached. Mr. Statham, she said softly, I'd really like to apologize again. Jason paused his steps, took out his earbuds, and turned toward her. No need to keep apologizing. No, I've been thinking about how I judged you, about how often I judge everyone. I thought I was just doing my job, but you showed me something yesterday. Jason nodded, letting her speak. You showed me that how we treat people, especially when we think they're nobodies, says everything about who we are. And yesterday, I didn't like who I was. You placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Then make a different choice today. Sophie nodded, eyes glassy. I will. And she did. Over the next week, Sophie transformed. She went from being the rushed, sarcastic front desk manager to the heart of the hotel. She stopped assuming. She listened more. She learned names of guests, of the cleaning staff, of the late-night doorman. She volunteered to train new hires, helped a homeless man outside the hotel get warm food and a coat, and even organized a birthday surprise for an elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary in the hotel. Jason had only booked the room for one night, but he stayed 5, not because the bed was comfortable, not because the suite had a good view, but because he was watching Sophie, observing her growth, seeing a fire light up inside, someone who had previously been running on fumes. And on the 6th morning, when he finally came down to check out, he didn't do it through the private executive elevator. He walked straight to the front desk, where Sophie stood with her shoulders square and her confidence genuine, not forced. Mr. Statham, she greeted with a real smile. Checking out. Jason smiled back. Yes, but I'll be back. She handed him the printed folio, which had been meticulously prepared, double-checked 3 times. But tucked behind it, folded carefully, was a letter. A handwritten one. Jason raised an eyebrow. From me, Sophie said. Just a thank you. He tucked it into his coat without reading it, nodding slowly. I'll read it when I need a reminder of why this place matters. He turned to go, but then paused. By the way, he said over his shoulder. How would you feel about stepping up, running the whole front-of-house team? Sophie's eyes widened. You mean a promotion? Jason gave her a wink. I think you've earned it. Then he walked out into the drizzle. No entourage, no spotlight, just a man with a quiet mission. And Sophie? She stood still for a long moment, holding the empty folio, heart pounding for a different reason now. Not fear, not shame, but gratitude and determination. Because she knew, without a doubt, that moment wasn't luck. It was transformation. It was what happened when someone like Jason Statham walked through your life. Not to punish you, not to preach, but to remind you that greatness doesn't always come from the big stage. Sometimes it comes from the lobby. 3 days after Jason's quiet departure from the hotel, the rhythm of the lobby returned to what most would consider normal. Guests came and went. Bellhop smiled as they carried luggage through the marble corridors, and the smell of fresh croissants and rich espresso wafted through the air from the adjacent cafe. But for Sophie, things had changed in a way no guest could see. She walked differently, spoke with a new sense of intention. Her mind, once clouded with self-doubt and anxiety, now buzzed with clarity. The awkward, unsure girl who used to hide behind sarcasm and pretense had taken a back seat to someone rising into her potential. Every morning, she arrived early. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She wanted to honor the gift Jason had given her. Not the promotion, not even the second chance, but the mirror he had held up. Then, one rainy afternoon, almost identical to the day Jason first checked in, the phone rang at the front desk. Sophie answered with her usual poised tone. Good afternoon, Montague Hotel. This is Sophie. How may I assist you? The voice on the other end was slow, uncertain. Male. Elderly. Yes, hello. I'm looking for someone. I don't know if she works there anymore. Sophie's brows furrowed. Who are you looking for, sir? There was a pause. A girl. Well, woman. Her name's Sophie Reynolds. Worked at reception a few months ago. I think she might be my daughter. The words struck her like ice water. Her knees weakened. She nearly dropped the receiver. I'm Sophie Reynolds, she said slowly, her voice catching in her throat. Who's calling, please? There was another long pause on the other end. My name is Leonard. Leonard Barker. I think I might be your father. She didn't say anything. Couldn't. Her throat tightened, her eyes wide, darting around as if searching for something to ground her. This was impossible. Her father had left when she was 3. No calls, no letters, no explanations. Her mother had only said he wasn't ready to be a parent. She had grown up resenting the shadow of a man who had never shown up. Now, he was calling? I'm sorry, Sophie said, her voice steadying through the storm inside her. How did you find me? I saw the hotel on a segment last night, he said. A guest was talking about an experience with a staff member named Sophie. He didn't say much, but he described a receptionist who changed. Said she reminded him why kindness matters. Said her name, and I just knew. I've been searching for years, but didn't know where to start. When I saw your name, I had to try. Sophie took a deep breath. What do you want? To meet, he said gently. Just once. If you'll allow it. I understand if you say no. I've lived with a lot of regret, and when I saw what people said about you, I realized I might have missed out on knowing an incredible woman. Sophie stared down at the counter, her reflection distorted in the polished granite. She had been rebuilding herself, finding her place. And now this? The wound she thought had long since scarred over felt freshly torn. I'll think about it, she said, before politely ending the call. That night, she sat alone in the staff lounge, staring at the handwritten note Jason had never responded to. She had poured her truth into that letter, never expecting him to read it, but writing it had helped her heal. And now, with this unexpected twist in her life, she needed guidance. Not from a book, not from a video, but from someone who had once looked her in the eye and reminded her that what you do after the mistake is what defines you. She picked up her phone and typed a message. She had Jason's contact. Michael had shared it after Jason approved her promotion. Hi, Mr. Statham. I know this is probably crossing a line, but I'm going through something personal. Not looking for a favor, just clarity. If you have a moment to talk, I'd really appreciate it. Sophie. She didn't expect a reply. He was probably shooting in another country or deep in some contract negotiations. But 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed. "You're not crossing a line. Coffee? Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Lobby Cafe. J." The next morning, she arrived early again. But this time, her nerves weren't about a celebrity or job performance. This was different. This was about truth. Jason walked in precisely at 9 o'clock. No bodyguard, no flash, just a man who had quietly changed her life. He sat down across from her, nodded once, and took a sip of the black coffee she'd already ordered for him. "What's going on?" he asked. No preamble, no small talk. She told him everything. The call, the name, the confusion, the pain, the memory of her mother crying in the kitchen, holding a letter she never showed her. The ache of growing up with no answers. Jason listened, not with the look of a man waiting to respond, but with the stillness of someone who hears. When she finished, she expected advice. A maxim, a proverb, something slick and perfectly quotable. Instead, he said, "Truth is like an old wound. You can cover up all you want, but unless you clean it out, it festers." Sophie nodded slowly, the words soaking in. "You don't owe him forgiveness," Jason added, "but you owe yourself the right to be free of the question." She blinked. What question? The one that keeps you up at night. The why. If you meet him, you might not get closure, but you'll get clarity, and that's a good start. Sophie took a deep breath, realizing how right he was. She wasn't seeking reunion. She wasn't even sure she wanted a father, but the ghost had knocked on her door, and now she had to decide whether to open it or keep pretending it wasn't there. That Sunday, she met Leonard at a small cafe on the Thames. He was older than she imagined, slower, but his eyes held pain, real pain. He didn't try to explain away his absence. He didn't defend himself. He simply said, "I ran from responsibility. I ran from fear, and I paid for it with every year I missed of your life." Sophie listened. That's all. Listened. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She didn't hug him either. She just allowed herself to see him. And in doing so, the chain that had hung around her spirit for so long loosened, just slightly. When she left that cafe, she didn't look back. Not out of resentment, but because she had finally seen the face of a wound she'd spent her whole life ignoring. And for the first time, she felt something that surprised her. Peace. She returned to work that Monday with a new depth behind her eyes. The guests still came and went. The jazz still played. But Sophie now walked through those halls, not just as an employee, not just as a woman with a second chance, but as someone who had taken control of her own story. What she didn't know was that across town, Jason Statham was preparing something that would once again collide with her world. Only this time, it wouldn't be private. It wouldn't be subtle. It would be public. And it would come in the form of a speech in front of an international audience, where he would mention her by name and change the course of her life forever. 2 months passed. The drizzle had turned to snowflakes, and London wore its classic winter coat, gray skies, glowing lamp posts, and the subtle hum of festivity in the air. The Montague Hotel had never looked more alive. Holiday garlands curled around the marble columns, cinnamon-scented candles flickered in the lobby, and guests now entered not just for luxury, but for something more elusive, authenticity. The hotel had gained a reputation in recent weeks not just for its high-end amenities, but for the genuine warmth of its staff. Unbeknownst to most of the city, the transformation had begun with a mistake. One mistake, one moment of misjudgment, one simple exchange between a receptionist who had once been too busy to look up and a man who had once been too famous to be seen for who he really was. Sophie Reynolds had become the kind of leader most companies pray for. She didn't bark orders. She didn't micromanage. She inspired. When the concierge forgot a guest's birthday, Sophie had a cake made herself. When the laundry department broke a single button on a guest jacket, Sophie personally replaced it. She knew the names of every intern, remembered the allergies of repeat guests, and started a new initiative called the 60-Second Pause, where staff were encouraged to stop, listen, and ask one genuine question to one person every day, staff or guest alike. It had become a culture, a movement even, but Sophie didn't think of it that way. She just thought she was doing her job. Meanwhile, Jason Statham had been busy too, but in a way that no one expected. What had begun as a quiet retreat to his own hotel had bloomed into something far more personal. He kept thinking about Sophie's letter. He had read it the same night he checked out, sitting alone in the back of the car as the city blurred past his window. And something about her handwriting, tight at first, like she didn't trust her own words, but looser toward the end, as if her soul had exhaled, stuck with him. It wasn't just a thank you note. It was a timeline, a confession, a rebirth. It made him realize something that had gnawed at the edges of his mind for years. That success didn't mean much if you couldn't help someone else carry their weight. That maybe, just maybe, his greatest role wasn't on a screen, it was off of it. So when he was asked to be the keynote speaker at a prestigious international leadership summit held in Geneva, a gathering of CEOs, philanthropists, world leaders, and innovators, he said yes. Not because he needed the exposure, but because he had a story to tell. And it wasn't his. The auditorium was packed. Over 1,000 people in tailored suits and designer heels sat in rows, sipping still water, thumbing through programs filled with names like Elon Musk, Malala Yousafzai, and Richard Branson. Jason was introduced not as an action star, but as a quiet investor, a thinker, and, this time, an observer of humanity. He took the stage in his signature black suit, no tie, clean-shaven, holding no notes. The spotlight hit him, and he scanned the crowd slowly before he began. "I want to tell you a story," he said. The room fell silent. "A few months ago, I walked into a hotel, one that I happened to own, but I didn't come through the owner's door. I came in like any guest, no announcement, no team, just me. And I was turned away." Some in the crowd chuckled. But this isn't a story about celebrity or power. It's a story about misjudgment, about a woman named Sophie Reynolds, a receptionist who made a mistake, a big one. She didn't recognize me, thought I was pulling a scam. She was stressed, overwhelmed, and, let's be honest, she thought I looked a bit like a drowned rat. Laughter rippled through the audience. But what happened next is why I'm standing here. Because Sophie did something most people don't. She grew, not just by apologizing, not just by trying harder, but by becoming someone better. I watched her transform a mistake into a mission. She didn't just serve guests. She served people. She started leading from the inside out. He paused, scanning the crowd again. We talk a lot about leadership in rooms like this, about metrics, innovation, disruption. But I learned more watching Sophie behind a front desk than I ever did on a film set or in a boardroom. Because true leadership, he said, his voice tightening just slightly with emotion, isn't about who's watching. It's about how you behave when no one is. The room was still. "I'm not the hero in this story," he continued. "She is. Sophie Reynolds, a receptionist who reminded me that sometimes the people with the most to teach us don't sit on stages or speak for podiums. They stand behind counters. They answer phones. They clean rooms. They keep the engine running while the rest of the world forgets they exist." He finished to a standing ovation. The speech was recorded, streamed, and within 24 hours, it had gone viral. News outlets replayed clips. Social media exploded with posts tagged #Sophie Effect. Thousands of hotel staff around the world shared their own stories. And at the Montague, phones rang off the hook. Guests wanted to book rooms. Reporters wanted interviews. And people started asking a question Sophie had never heard before. "Is Ms. Reynolds available for a comment?" At first, she tried to stay under the radar. "I'm just doing my job," she told the PR rep. But the hotel chain's director called personally and said, "No, Sophie. You become the face of what we want to stand for." A week later, she stood on a smaller stage, not Geneva, but a hospitality convention in Manchester, nervous, palms sweaty, staring at a crowd of hundreds. She cleared her throat, blinked at the lights, and began. "I'm not a speaker," she said. "I'm a receptionist. I answer phones. I greet strangers. I make sure someone's had a nice flight and knows where the ice machine is. But recently, someone showed me that even small jobs have big power. That one conversation, one mistake, one act of kindness, it can change everything." She spoke for 15 minutes. They gave her a 10-minute standing ovation. Soon, Sophie was invited to panels, podcasts, even mentorship programs. She helped rewrite the training manual for a major hotel group, and she insisted that emotional intelligence and humility be listed as key competencies. She still worked at the Montague, but now from a new office, director of guest experience. But she didn't spend her days hidden away. Every morning, she still greeted the first guest personally, still remembered names, still took a 60-second pause with her staff. And one morning, as she stepped into the lobby in her new tailored blazer, she found a note waiting for her on the front desk. It was from Jason. It read, "The best stories are the ones where no one sees the twist coming. Yours is one of my favorites. Jay." She smiled, but little did she know, the biggest twist was still to come. Because just as her world was stabilizing, just as her voice was being heard, a crisis would hit the Montague, one that threatened the very soul of the hotel, tested her leadership to its breaking point, and revealed whether she had truly grown or merely risen with the tide. It came not with warning, not with a tremor, but with a quiet knock on the door of Sophie's new office one frozen January morning. She was seated at her desk, reviewing a proposal for an employee wellness initiative, a fresh espresso steaming beside her. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. Her assistant, Amina, peeked her head in. "There's someone here from corporate," she said, voice tight. "They want to speak with you. It's urgent." Sophie looked up, puzzled. "Did they say what it's about?" Amina shook her head. "Only that it concerns the hotel's future." Sophie stood, composed herself, and walked down the corridor to the conference room. Inside, two men in suits waited. One was tall and rigid, the other smaller but shrewd, tapping on a tablet with a stylus. They introduced themselves as regional executives from the holding company, the same one that Jason Statham had invested in quietly over a decade ago. Without preamble, the taller man spoke. "There's been a proposal," he said. "Due to rising operational costs and competitive development nearby, the board is considering selling the Montague Hotel to an international group that wants to convert it into an elite members-only private club." Sophie blinked. I'm sorry, come again?" The smaller man spoke now. "A private equity firm out of Dubai has made an offer that's double current valuation. They want to rebrand the Montague as the Orem House, exclusive to celebrities, royals, influencers. No public bookings, no standard guests. Everything will be subscription-based. You'd likely be retained in a new position, of course. Retained, like a piece of furniture." Sophie's throat dried. "You're saying they want to gut the soul of this place?" "We're saying the offer is significant," the taller man replied. "And unless Mr. Statham objects directly, the board may proceed with due diligence in under 30 days. It felt like a knife had been slipped between her ribs. She walked out of the room and went straight to the rooftop terrace, hands trembling as she dialed Jason's number. He answered after 3 rings. "Sophie, they're selling the Montague," she said without preamble, "to a group that wants to erase everything we've built." Silence. Then, "I didn't approve anything. They said unless you object, the board moves forward." Jason exhaled slowly. "I'll be there by morning." Click. That night, Sophie didn't sleep. She walked the halls of the Montague like a ghost, touching banisters, running her fingers along the art frames she'd helped select. Every hallway was a memory. Every suite a story. This wasn't just a hotel. It was a living thing. A place where she had fallen, risen, grown, where kindness had been resurrected and people had been reminded of their dignity. Now, it was about to be turned into a playground for the elite. By 7:45 the next morning, Jason arrived, leather coat, sharp eyes, and the walk of a man with unfinished business. He entered the same lobby he had once been turned away from. This time, every staff member turned and nodded, some with smiles, some with hope. He went straight to the boardroom. The executives sat waiting, guarded expressions betraying the tension. Jason didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, one hand resting casually on the wood. "You're making a mistake," he said simply. The taller executive stood. "With all due respect, Jason, the numbers don't lie. This is a high-return opportunity." Jason chuckled softly. "You're right. The numbers don't lie, but they don't tell the whole truth either." He took a folder from his coat and placed it on the table. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, emails, handwritten notes. Testimonials from guests, staff, even tourists who had never stayed but had heard of the Montague through the now-viral Sophie speech. Stories of how they'd been treated like family, how a gesture from a receptionist or a porter had changed their outlook. Jason turned and looked at every man in the room. "This hotel isn't just a building," he said. "It's a brand, a living, breathing culture. And if you sell it, you don't just lose a property, you destroy something rare in this industry. Trust." The room was quiet. Jason dropped the final card. "I'm buying out the remaining stake. Today." Murmurs. "You can't just." "I can," Jason cut in. "And I will. I'll let the numbers people handle too much for too long. This one, I'm taking back." By noon, the deal was done. Jason wired the buyout funds personally. The Montague Hotel was now fully under his private ownership again. And then he did something unexpected. He called a staff meeting. Every employee gathered in the atrium. Cleaning staff, cooks, desk agents, security. Jason stood on the central staircase, Sophie at his side. "I want to tell you all something," he began. 2 months ago, I came here just to get some rest. I left with a deeper sense of purpose. Not because of a room, not because of luxury, but because of you, because of what you all built here, especially this one." He turned to Sophie. "She made a mistake, like we all do, but she used it to rise. And in doing so, she showed me what leadership really looks like." Sophie looked down shyly. Jason continued. "I'm proud to announce that effective immediately, Sophie Reynolds will serve as general manager of the Montague Hotel." The applause shook the glass. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. Jason leaned closer. "You didn't just earn a job," he whispered. "You earned a legacy." That night, the Montague lit up, not just with lights, but with something richer: joy. Guests celebrated. Staff danced. Sophie gave her first speech as GM and spoke not of herself, but of us, of teamwork, of humility, of how leadership is a light switch you flip on with every act of humanity. And in the back of the room, watching quietly, Jason smiled. Not because he had saved a hotel, but because he had seen someone do what so few ever do: turn a single moment of failure into a lifetime of meaning. And as he stepped outside into the night, pulling his coat tight around him, he glanced up at the golden Montague sign above the door. He had walked in once looking for rest, but what he found instead was something better. He found Sophie, and in helping her rise, he had reminded himself of the most powerful truth of all: that real impact doesn't come from status or wealth or fame. It comes from seeing someone, really seeing them, and letting them know they matter, even when the world forgets. Especially then,